Good evening. Good evening. Welcome everyone to the Policy Subcommittee meeting. We'll go ahead and get started with our first agenda item, which is review and approval of the minutes of September 22nd Policy Review Subcommittee meeting. Would someone like to move them? Thank you, Andy. Stephen, you second? All right, Andy, your vote?
Yes.
Stephen?
Yes.
And I also vote yes. So now we will look at the 2023-24 school committee goals. And Betsy, would you mind putting up the draft I sent?
Sure, let me get that. All right, can everyone see it?
Yeah.
All right, so as you can see, when we had discussed our goals at the summer workshop, we settled on a community engagement plan, which has yet to be fully written, but the idea of having a community engagement plan. We also discussed developing indicators for our values. We also talked about engaging in equity work as a school committee. And we also discussed reviewing the policy manual and updating it. So I tried to add some language to some of these to try to flesh out a bit more what we might have meant by them, and I'd like your thoughts.
You know what might be an idea on the first one is to put community engagement as the title, community engagement plan as the title, and then bullet the items.
Okay.
That way they stand out, otherwise things get lost.
Is there anything else that we feel should be added to the community engagement plan?
I'm not sure what assignments to school committee members means.
I think just to ensure that they're sort of a similar structure that we have with liaisons and subcommittees, just to ensure that there's someone on top of maintaining each relationship.
Well, why don't we just bullet, what do we call our liaisons? Not community, well, they're not community liaisons, liaisons to boards and
Community partners, maybe?
okay. Liaisons to community partners. Good. That's good.
Helen, we had also talked about like assigning different school committee members to different schools so that there would sort of be a point person for their events and stuff. So I think that might have been what we were talking about.
Oh,
when we were
maybe
saying,
that's
like,
what you're,
assignments.
okay.
Yes. It's not just
Right.
the liaisons, it was things like that, I think.
Well, that could be another bullet point.
Okay, so assign a school committee member to each school, which does make sense. There are 9 of us, 9 schools, although a little bit more if we include special programming, but at least there'll be
And you
one for
forgot
everybody.
beep.
Right.
But that's okay.
David, I would rephrase greater visibility at community events to increased presence at community events.
Okay. Any other thoughts on this?
It also, it doesn't include that we are interacting with parent communities per school, but I think that's okay. This doesn't need to include every aspect of the engagement work that's going to be done. I'm just thinking out loud.
And also, this is not meant to encompass absolutely everything that would fit into community engagement, because there's going to be, or at least my hope, is that there would be a written community engagement plan that goes into more detail. This is just stating our goal of having a community engagement plan and what that might look like in broad strokes. But in terms of the specifics, certainly we would want something a bit more detailed. And I'm wondering if that's something that the communications team would want to take up. Mariah, Stephen? Do you think the two of you would maybe want to work on what the community engagement plan actually looks like in more detail?
I don't,
Certainly.
Okay.
I would. I'm just speaking for myself. I'd be happy to.
I'm sorry, to articulate the plan or to carry it out?
To at least articulate it. I don't expect that just the four of you would carry it out. The 9 of us would carry it out. But in terms of having it written in more detail and providing those additional structures.
Sure.
All right.
Who's the 4 of us, just to be clear? It's just me. It's me and Stephen and Val, as far as I know. I just was not sure if.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
Okay.
Right now, although we will soon have a 9th school committee member who may or may not end up on there, but I do want to give you a 4th. All right, so how about second goal? Develop indicators for our values in concert with the district strategic plan. So what I added were just categories of types of indicators that other districts use in measuring student achievement. And those include non-cognitive factor scores, co-curricular engagement, classroom attendance, milestone assignment grades, formative assessments, summative assessments, standardized test scores, which I know most of us don't love, but they are an indicator. So I was just listing them all.
I'm confused as to what who is developing?
We would, along with the superintendent. So the idea is that we have a lot of discussions about what success looks like, but we don't actually say how we're measuring success. And so to the extent that we can expressly articulate what are the measures, what are the indicators that we're looking for when determining whether a program is successful or not, I think it would be helpful for us to establish what those factors are. Because right now it's very amorphous anytime we have a discussion about what's successful and what isn't.
So is it indicators for our values or indicators for success in concert with the districts?
I would think our values, but we work on that with the districts because the district would probably certainly have advice as to what the indicators should be. We don't necessarily have to agree completely with those suggestions, but it would be helpful to receive district input on it. Andy?
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand what it means for this to be done in concert with the strategic plan. So the strategic plan, it will itself include some indicators, no? It'll have sort of goals and indicators for those goals, I believe.
Yeah.
And so this is going to be a separate thing where we sort of have our values and then we kind of look at the strategic plan to see which pieces of that can be taken as indicators of how well we're living up to our values.
I think we look at the strategic plan for potential alignment. Where there is not alignment, there would be further discussion. But what we value as a school committee might not necessarily match up perfectly with what the district values. Now, obviously, in an ideal world, it would match up perfectly, but it doesn't have to. This is up to us. These are our goals, not necessarily the superintendent's. The reason I'm referring to in concert with the district strategic plan is because I think it makes sense to have that discussion jointly because the district has the professional educators. They can advise us on what they think would be appropriate indicators. They can provide us with helpful input.
If I could follow up though, I mean, I thought that school committee goals are supposed to be mainly about the functioning of the school committee, whereas here this seems to be sort of spreading out into sort of district goals for the district, which then we would end up with kind of parallel documents. There's a strategic plan and then there's the school committee's values overlapping with the strategic plan. And so I'm not sure how that doesn't lead to confusion.
So I see it more as what I was explaining to Helen. It's to help us ourselves have more focused conversations when we are evaluating the success of a program. So if we are using a common language of indicators that we value, then that will help inform whether we provide funding for a certain program or whether we recommend that a certain other program fold into another. We've had those conversations at times, but without really any guardrails to it. So this is an effort to decide what our values are as to different indicators and utilize those indicators as a part of our analysis. And by our analysis, I mean school committee analysis. Mariah? You're on mute, Mariah? All right, maybe Mariah's somewhere else at the moment. Stephen?
Sorry, did you call on me? I
Oh,
didn't hear
yes,
you.
go ahead, Mariah.
I was going to, I think, basically agree with Andy. I don't like the idea of us having parallel indicators. I feel like any indicators we think are sort of critical need to be in the strategic plan as opposed to living in some parallel environment.
What if our second goal, I'm sorry, Stephen, you were next.
Oh, no, go ahead, Helen.
What if our second goal were to support the district's strategic plan?
Yeah,
Okay, so I will jump in. So I think there's two ways that this can go. I think we're all in agreement that the development of the mission, vision, and goals for the district, vision, mission, and values for the district was done on a parallel track with the development of the strategic plan, and that feels kind of awkward. So we weren't able to direct the strategic plan in the way we were hoping to be able to. So I think either this becomes a very forward-looking goal where we're developing indicators or targets for FY 24-25 and beyond, where we're putting more specificity behind what we had in mind for the work that we did the past few months in developing the mission, vision, and values for the district, so that future strategic plans or versions of the strategic plan can be more easily aligned with the vision of the school committee, or we work collaboratively with the administration on specific indicators for the goals that they set for FY 23-24, that we're actually proposing a collaborative work activity for the current year. That latter one seems to me a bit beyond our scope, and the former one seems very forward-looking to me. So I'm not sure which way to go, but I don't see how this can be actionable without choosing a path.
All right, Helen, go ahead.
Well, I hear what you're saying, Stephen, but it seems to me that we really need to have as a goal to support the district's strategic plan. I mean, how else are they going to move forward with it? And maybe support the district's strategic plan with periodic reports out to the school committee on advancement of that plan.
I'm not sure that's a support. That sounds more like a request for
Yeah. Okay.
that's
I don't know. I think we need to support it. That's my point. That's all. I'm done.
All right, so it sounds like there's confusion as to what we meant by this goal when we provisionally voted for it at the summer workshop. So Helen would like to go in the direction where we support the strategic plan. It sounds like Andy and Mariah feel we may not need this as a goal at all. This is more the domain of the strategic plan.
I'd be willing to strike it as well.
I'm more interested in the part, and maybe it doesn't belong here, but I do think it's important for us to establish indicators. I don't really like that we just have these very open-ended circular conversations sometimes when we're trying to measure the success of something, and then it never really gets settled. Mariah?
I agree with you, David. I just think that the things that we think are important as indicators should be in the strategic plan, because none of us can measure any of those things. We need staff to actually measure these things. And so if they can't measure them, or they, for whatever reason, either because the data is not available or it's too intensive or whatever, it just needs to be part and integral into the strategic plan. And I presume that part of the process that we're going to be going through even later this week is where we're going to provide feedback on what's in the strategic plan. And if it doesn't include these sort of indicators, that this is our time to say, please add these indicators in, not to create a separate process or anything else. So I just would like to see it all rolled into one document. And I felt comfortable with how, I don't know if the word I would use is exactly how Helen described it, of supporting it, but also But in some ways it is, because it's ensuring that the strategic plan reflects the indicators that we want it to include.
All right, so we could make it support the strategic plan and then just make sure that the strategic plan is actually something we support.
Yeah.
Okay, that works. So let's move on to goal number 3 then, which it was essentially to work on equity as a school committee. So I tried to build that out based on what I thought Suzanne was indicating. Was Suzanne who sort of came up with this one. So I'm wondering what the rest of you think.
I thought we had this one 2 years ago. We had talked about we were going to do it. I didn't think Suzanne made it up. I thought it was a continuation of our.
We definitely had equity as a goal. What we did not have as a goal was looking at equity in terms of our operational practice and analysis. So I
I see.
think it was a more focused, tangible way of utilizing equity. So I like the idea of having readings in equity, having further discussions in it, becoming more well-versed in the subject. I just think that makes us better trained school committee members for having important conversations. And that would be something that's certainly within our own control. And it's something that we
Right.
can address at workshops. Sometimes it can be self-guided, where we are just reading from a book that we agree is worth reading. And other times it can be expert facilitated. You may recall that we had a couple of workshops where we worked with Janae. So there could be similar workshops in the future.
I think it's great, David. I don't have any changes to it.
All right, Helen?
I would just do one grammatical change, because as I
Uh-huh.
read it to begin with, it jarred me. I would take the phrase "to improve its operational practice and analysis" and put that at the end and start with "the school committee shall engage in ongoing da, 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 da," and at the end of assessment, in order to improve its operational practice and analysis.
All right.
I don't know if others agree with me, but it just,
I'm fine with that.
Where does the policies still go as its own separate sentence at the end? You're just moving that one bit of the sentence, the first sentence to the end, right?
that's what
And then
I
the-
was, yeah.
Okay, okay.
All right, so it seems we have general agreement on this one.
Oh,
So
and maybe what you said, you could say, hold on. Practice analysis. You know what? Maybe it goes the other way. You have that first sentence without the phrase, "the school committee and what we're going to do,"
I think it's okay either way.
and then say, "to improve its operational practice and policies shall be continually reviewed and revised through an equity lens."
but that would be focused just on policies. I think we're looking at improving our operational practice and analysis with everything. But I'm
Okay.
fine with your initial suggestion of having
Okay.
that be the end of that
Okay.
sentence. All right, so now for the 4th goal. This one we essentially always have, which is to update our policy manual. I'm being a bit more specific. I'm hoping we can finally get through 2 entire sections. We've actually had the financial section ready to go for about 2 years now, but for various reasons, it's never quite proceeded to the full school committee, various changes in personnel being the primary reason for that. So that one I think is ready to go. And then it might also be the right time to have a full review on the instructional section. We have a new deputy superintendent of teaching and learning. So I think that could be a good opportunity to update that section as well.
One suggestion,
Yes.
sometimes less is more. We may want to look at policies that we don't need anymore. Rather than always adding more and more, think about some things that might not, streamlining.
Okay. We actually have done some of that the last couple of years where we remove policies, but that's something we should continue to do. I agree.
Maybe comprehensively review, streamline, and update.
In finance, Helen, there's gonna be whole sections of it that are like removed.
Oh, okay, great.
Yes, yeah. It is basically ready, as David said.
David, can I just make one more point about number 2?
Sure.
That I promise I'll leave it alone. I just feel like I need to say more clearly. I do feel like the process for developing the mission, vision, goals, and the district strategic plan was confusing for all of us. It was done in parallel, and in so doing, they were not aligned. And I don't really see a way to do number 2 this year without doing it in a very forward-looking way. But I do want to also support Dr. Guillory's strategic plan this year, and I do want to accept his recommendation that we see the strategic planning process as iterative. So I want to take what I felt like was his recommendation to see it iteratively, to propose looking at number 2 in that forward-looking way, and plan to develop indicators over a longer term. So rather than trying to squash the district strategic plan into alignment with what we produced over the last few months in the shortest term, I want to propose looking at number 2 in the longer term way. I'm repeating myself now, but I was hoping to just say what I wanted as clearly as possible and then not speak of it again. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Now we have a couple of attendees. Would either of the attendees like to speak on this particular agenda item? And I will give you opportunities to speak on other agenda items so that we can go in orderly fashion. Betsy, if you could elevate Ms. Dahl to panelist.
Will do.
Thank you, David. And apologies for not being very up to speed with what you're doing here. I was looking for the materials online and didn't see them. And I only looked at this agenda like an hour ago. So I had been provided with, through my role on AC, with a document that was titled PSB Mission Vision Core Values. Is that what you're now saying you've put aside because you were doing something in parallel, and sort of everything is here in what you just discussed? Or is the PSB Mission Vision Core Values also a document that you are revising? Because there were a number of notes, at least in the document I got, that was like original proposed.
Stephen, looks like you have an answer to that.
Right. So there are 2 documents, Caroline. One was the mission vision and values. That was the school committee developed document. And then there was the PSB strategic plan, which was the administration developed document. And it's been our struggle to align those 2 documents. I think what's being discussed here was how to develop indicators that helps align those 2 visions, right? Am I getting that right?
Yes. Andy, you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the subtext to what you were hearing earlier, Carolyn, is that we had kind of expected that the mission vision statement was supposed to sort of exist already in order to guide the strategic planning process. And in fact, it was done backwards, where the strategic planning process was quite far advanced before the school committee ever got around to working on that other document. And so, you know, that document now exists, but it didn't fulfill the role in this process that we had hoped and expected. Is that how you would characterize it, Stephen? Yeah.
But
Helen?
if I could just sort of talk a little bit more, there has been a mission, vision, and core values statement from the school committee since I've been on the school committee, I think. And the strategic plan used the one that existed, added one that wasn't clear. And but then the school committee decided to update that school mission, vision, and core values, incorporating most of what was there already, and adding a bit more.
So, thank you,
It's an
Helen.
iterative process.
And we actually removed, I mean, this Stephen removed quite a bit of, what had been there before and streamlined it greatly, I think.
Mhm.
So when I go online right now, which is another story, I think I'm seeing the original.
How many
Yes.
core values are there?
5 core values.
It's
So there's a vision statement,
So that's not
5
it.
core
So
values
there's an
and
updated
4
one, Carolyn.
goals.
There's
So-
an updated one with a sixth value that hasn't been posted then to the website.
And the website. So I guess I don't know the status of your updates to this. What I'm seeing on the website is what in the working document that I was provided, and maybe it was, but it was only like a week or so ago. Maybe it's not current anymore. But what I'm seeing online is the original. So maybe what's, putting aside what's online, maybe just hasn't been updated. You are also still updating that whole thing, the mission, vision, core values.
That was all voted on and approved, so that still needs to be posted to the website. What
Okay,
hasn't been completed is the strategic plan,
okay.
which we're workshopping later this week.
So given that it's not your agenda item, can I comment or not on the PSB mission and vision?
You can go ahead if you like.
Okay, I would like. And I say this respectfully to the people who worked on it. I want to say as an observer and as somebody who talks to and hears from parents frequently, and I have 2 kids in the school still, I find it distressing to see the changes, some of the changes that have been made. For example, the word academic no longer exists. The word program no longer exists. Those words are replaced by learning experiences and supportive community. It troubles me, and it's consistent with what has troubled me for the last few years, and what I think you hear from a lot of parents right now is troubling them. I think taking out the word academic and program reflects a direction that I don't think a lot of constituents are happy with. Other changes, achievement is replaced by joy in learning. Joy in learning is great, but it's a shame to see the word achievement gone. So things like that are troubling, and I won't go on. I have some notes that aren't going to make sense to me right now. So I wanted to say that. And I think that I think you're seeing the results of that, this lack of focus on rigor, standards, teaching, learning, instruction. I know there are other big, broad things that people are focusing on, but it seems like the basics are slowly but surely being sacrificed. And I think you see it, and I hear that consistently. So thank you for listening to that comment.
Mariah?
I just want to register my vehement disagreement with the characterization of the mission, vision, and goals as we voted them.
All right, so
Yeah,
why
can
don't,
can I
go ahead,
comment as
Pete.
well? I think, Carol, I'm looking at it also as you're going through it. I think you're reacting to goal 1, mostly changing high achievement for all to joy and learning. So I know there was no intention to remove the idea of rigor. In fact, there was a lot of conversation about leaving in statements like we emphasize high expectations for all students. The idea, my recollection, was to add that there was an expectation of instilling an expectation that we were instilling a love for learning in there. So that wasn't our intention, to remove any expectation of rigor. So I'll leave it there.
All right, so why don't we go ahead and move on to our next agenda item, which is review and continued discussion of an inclusion in the life of the school policy. Betsy, if you could pull that one up.
Will do. One sec. Can everyone see it?
All right, so on this one, we received some community feedback about the importance of explicitly including out-of-district students in a policy about inclusion in life of the school. So I've made some additions for PSB out-of-district students. Also, when we first discussed this, there had been some back and forth about whether we should spell out what we mean by life of the school. And I think that a majority of us present at that meeting felt that by listing some activities and not others, we were actually coming across as less inclusive. So I took out those examples in this first paragraph, although later on, when referring to the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, I kept the examples that they offer because obviously we have no control over the IDEA. But other than those modifications, this is fairly similar to the draft we looked at. I know that Mariah had a lot of interest in inclusion from a financial perspective. What do we do about students who are excluded from activities on the basis of not being able to pay? There are other policies where that can be addressed, but we could address that here as well if we would like to. And then one other area was our third-party contractors who come into the schools and offer extracurricular activities and what their obligations would be. So under federal law, their obligations do not rise to the level as ours would, but we can still certainly control with whom we contract. And so I kept in the language about them needing to explain their inclusion policies and the steps that they would be taking. Andy?
So I think I remember from our previous discussion of this draft policy, which was back in June, so it's been a while, that one of the thorniest issues was just how do we determine what is the level or type of support that's actually needed for a given student in a given activity. And that's not always easy to derive from the student's IEP, right? And so there was some discussion of having to maybe specify who would make that determination, or maybe have some guidelines about how the determination is made. So is that something we do or don't want to address in this policy?
I'm open to either construction of it. My sense is that where we are silent to something on a particular issue, it's ultimately up to the superintendent. Where we get more explicit, we're becoming more restrictive, but more restrictive is sometimes appropriate or informative. So I could go either way on this. How do you feel, Stephen, Mariah, Helen?
Should I raise my hand or should I talk? I can't see who else is on.
Go ahead, you can talk.
Okay. I think that it's important for us to clarify to the extent that there may be significant financial implications here. So just to give one example, if we are, if a student who requires one-on-one support during the day is participating in the play, you know, should we make clear that we expect that the one-on-one support is going to stay during their after-school activities? And so I think giving the sort of directive of that, or maybe they're examples. I want it to be clear that we understand the ramifications of the policy as we are establishing it.
Okay. Anyone else?
Can I make one other comment about
Yes,
that?
go.
Just that I know that, and I'm not sure where this landed. I thought that we stopped that with the last time we talked about this, we were going to go back and find out about the staffing ramifications. I thought with OSS, I could be wrong. But just to understand how this could work in practice because of the issues of being able to staff. Some people may not be able to work 1 day a week for 2 extra hours or something like that, like because it might be, an after school activity. So how does this practically work so that it achieves the goals and is reliable in the way that families and caregivers need it to be reliable?
All right, I haven't heard back from staff on that question, but I'll ask it again. That's definitely important. We want to understand the implications on staffing as well as our budget. Anyone else?
Yeah, I think the part where we talk about the extended days needs a conversation with them before we make this public to understand their issues. And we don't, I think we have to be careful. We don't want to do away with the extended days. They've been around for 50 years and have worked quite well, not always for all children, and that's a problem. But I think it's better to have that conversation first, and then
Helen,
this out. Yes.
can I ask a question about that? I thought that I understood that the point of this program was to essentially, I don't know if the right word's absorb, but acknowledge PSB's responsibility to cover those costs as opposed to the extended days. So I agree with you, we should talk to them, but not necessarily because it's increasing their burden, but actually because it's regularizing expectations between the different parties. That's how I understood this.
I may be reading it wrong.
Sorry to jump in, but
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Can you say it again, Andy?
Yeah, sorry, I was interrupting it, but I think the way it's written, it reads to me as though we're putting the burden on the provider to tell us how they're going to solve the problem rather than undertaking to do it ourselves.
Exactly.
All right, so we could reverse that.
I think we also have to think about, this is a complicated piece because this could actually cost us hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I think we need to think about whether what is our responsibility.
Well, Helen, part of the problem is we're already required to do this to some extent. And
within the school day, of course.
Well, all life
No,
of the activities actually.
That's right. Helen, we're not living to our obligation within the law. That's the whole point. The life of the school thing is pretty well determined, and we are not complying with what the law says. That's the issue.
Because of the extended days or other things?
Because life of the school is not from 8 to 2:30 or whatever, from start of the school day until end of the school day. There's a broader definition, and so after school activities and other things actually all count within it.
Well, I would assume, maybe I'm just nitpicking here, but life of the school has to do with things that we support, such as sports, such as the plays or things like that. Those are after school activities that we take on and support. Extended Day is a parent-run organization that provides care for parents who need care from school time till they've 5:30 or 6, whatever. I think they're different, but I'm not a lawyer.
They are, Helen, they are different, but what we're saying is that because we value the spirit of life in the school inclusion, that we will fill in those gaps for the extended day programs. Now, I wasn't sure we were willing to make that leap, given that we still don't quite know the associated cost. So
Exactly.
that's why I initially worded it, as you see in this draft in the reverse, that we're putting the obligation on them to at least explain what their plans are, so that we have a full understanding as to how third-party programs and vendors will be providing for our students and whether we deem that to be sufficient or not. But if this is something that we want to take on, we certainly can. I'm a little nervous from a financial perspective
I'm very nervous.
about taking that on. So that's why I personally prefer the current construction where they need to come to us with what their plan would be. And if it's deficient, we could jump in. If it's woefully deficient, we don't have to work with them. But it gives
Well,
us,
but I think we need to be really careful. I mean, we could have a few kids who need private nurses with them throughout the day.
So, okay, I'd like to advocate in this subcommittee for reconceiving our obligation and PSB to extend to a longer period of time that better corresponds to what families actually require from the school district. So in response to Helen, I would like to take a position in this subcommittee that we push for policies along the lines of these policies that require our vendors to take on these responsibilities. I hear what you're saying, Helen, that there are financial consequences. So I think this means for us, we have to be willing to consider what the financial burden is that we're willing to take on and advocate for on PSB's behalf as well. But I think that means in response, we don't back off the issue, we advocate more forcefully for it. And I think for the policy subcommittee, we start by this position of advocacy. So I think this is a change from previous positions that PSB has held, and I support that change.
Mariah?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
I just wanted to say that I think Stephen just said more or less what I wanted to say really well. But so I don't have a lot to add to that, but I think it's really important that as we think about how to ensure our extended days are surviving and thriving, as well as our families, making sure that this sort of infrastructure is in place is really important to all parties. And also, David, I would like if you would possibly get a clearer understanding legally, because it is my understanding that the life of the school does not extend, the life of the school does not extend to just school run activities, but to activities that occur in the school to which many students can participate. And I believe that extended day falls pretty clearly under that. And I thought we had a long conversation about this at a prior meeting, but perhaps we didn't. But anyways, I am pretty sure that extended days are covered under this, and that I believe there's legal precedent on this. So I would just like to get a clarification if we could, David.
Okay.
I just want to add, though, that regardless of the legal obligation, I still would like to push for this position, that I still would like to push for this orientation for PSB, regardless of the legal requirement. I think that we should be doing this.
I agree with Stephen. So yes, I'll get that legal clarification. But either way, I think this is the direction we want to go in. The question to me is more, who will bear the financial burden if it turns out that private third-party providers do not have to provide as much as PSB? If that is the legal universe we're operating in, who will bear the cost burden? To me, that's really the only question, not whether students will be included or provided access, rather. Andy?
So who would we turn to for an analysis of how much this would cost? I mean, there's the narrower world of extended day, and then there's all the other activities that could be affected by a change in policy, or maybe a more explicit spelling out of what we have in mind.
So I would think a couple people. We could certainly go to Lisa as Deputy Superintendent of Student Services, as well as Susan at Administration and Finance. And then for the legal clarity, we do have a special education law firm on retainer, and so I can reach out to them.
And for the extended days, I had the impression from our last meeting on this topic that there's some inconsistency. I mean, different extended day programs have adopted different approaches, in some cases leading to restrictions on who they can accept into their programs.
Correct.
So-
And that was part of the impetus for taking up this policy this year. There were some programs that were engaging in very exclusionary behaviors, and that's obviously quite problematic to us. And we heard a lot about it at a couple of CPAC meetings.
It sounds like.
Just to be clear, those weren't extended days. Those were
Oh,
special activities,
those are the
enrichment, thank you.
programs?
Those were the enrichment programs.
So,
Sorry, yes, I
so the
could.
extended days proper have a consistent approach, Mariah?
My understanding from talking to the extended days last year when we were talking about these larger issues was that the issue is not that they don't have a consistent approach, but that the district doesn't. So some of them get support from the district and some of them don't. And so it's very challenging for them to be able to plan and understand on their own budgeting and the implications of accepting students. And I think that they are not excluding students, but it's just a big budget question for them that they don't have resolved, and they really need some sort of a consistent policy to help them in their own budgeting process and sort of administration.
All right. Anyone else on this question about financial implications and whether we're going to provide full inclusion? Seems to me that we're nearly unanimous, if not unanimous, on wanting to extend inclusion. So it's more a question of the logistics of how we make that happen and if we fully understand the impacts.
I just have a question on the way forward, David. Have we spoken with our vendors on this policy just to get feedback from them as well?
Not in a formal manner, but I think that this certainly needs to be discussed at least one more policy subcommittee meeting.
Yeah, I agree. I wonder if we can invite them to a policy subcommittee meeting and invite their feedback on it, because I think that would be useful rather than to watch them respond after this is done.
No, I agree. So I think for our
Okay.
next policy subcommittee meeting, we will invite the extended day programs. We will invite the enrichment programs. We'll also certainly hope that Lisa and Susan can make it to answer the financial questions, and possibly even special education council, or at least have something in writing from them. And then I think we'll be in a better position. Mariah?
David, can I make one suggestion, which is I think I'm the extended day liaison. And in
Okay.
our process last year, talking about the change in rental rates, it was very helpful to provide them with information and allow them to respond in writing as a group when they once they've had the opportunity. So I just think it might be more valuable, rather than inviting them, if you can give me a draft of the next thing, and then we can have the opportunity to discuss it offline, and or they discuss amongst themselves and get back to me.
All right.
Thanks.
So in terms of that next draft, do we want to keep it as the obligations on the third party vendor, or we want to make it the obligation on the schools, or should I pivot based on what I hear from Lisa and Susan, hopefully before our next policy meeting?
My opinion is that I think it would be really unfortunate if we put the burden on the extended days for all of, and the third party vendors in general, for all of the reasons that we've said, and also because I think it will be very financially challenging for them. So I personally would like to see what it looks like if we took on this burden, accepted it, and then the financial burden, and then looked at the dollars cost and the logistics cost, but started from a place where the largest organization with the most capacity is the one that is going to manage it.
All right, Andy?
I would agree with Mariah here that we should redraft it to make ourselves responsible for it and then let everybody react to that. If it's not feasible, I'm sure we'll get to hear of it.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay, then one other question I have before moving on. Are we fine with the explicit mention of out-of-district students receiving notifications as well as being included in the life of the school policy at their respective home schools?
Yes, definitely.
All right,
Isn't that just aligning policy with practice at this point?
not quite, because apparently out-of-district students have been excluded at least from notifications.
But I thought that was fixed now as of this year.
There seems to be a recurring pattern where it gets fixed for one communication and then reverts after that, and then somebody has to bring it up again.
Right,
Okay.
it's fixed for certain categories of notifications, but not all notifications. So we want to make it all notifications.
Thank you for clarifying.
All right, so now let's move on to discussion and next steps for possible revisions to the assignment of students to schools policy. I see that we do not have any staff present to provide us with an update on data that we had been curious about. So I think we'll have to revisit this at a subsequent meeting. But while we have this as a docketed item, and we did discuss this at some length at the last school committee meeting, any other thoughts on school assignments and retentions? All right, seeing none, let's move on then to discussion of adopting town bylaw 839, menstrual hygiene products access, including amendments approved by town meeting on June 6th relative to reproductive and gender health care. I don't have the precise text of that up, but my understanding is that it was our intention as a school committee to fully adopt that as a policy. How do others feel about that?
We're
Yeah.
doing it.
Right, we're already doing it, so it's a question of just memorializing it in our
Just to
policy.
be clear, I don't think we are doing it completely. Like
Uh,
I was in the bathroom underneath Schluntz last spring, and there was a paid menstrual products machine in the basement, which I let Matt know about at the time. I haven't been back to see if it's been
Okay,
updated.
it may have been missed, but I know that the directive has been out for a while that none of them should be paid. I think it's a little bit of an issue in the elementary schools where it can become problematic, but I think they're dealing with it.
Is there anything that anyone can recall from that bylaw that would be problematic for us to implement? Then I say we go ahead and
David,
vote.
can I just make one comment, which is I think the last time we tried to look it up, the bylaws hadn't been updated.
Right.
And there was only partial bylaws in different spots, which made it difficult to understand the implications. So I didn't look it up again since then, but it was a challenge last time to understand what we were voting for, although we thought we supported it in general.
Okay.
So I don't know if that's changed.
So just in case it is ready to go, do we want to have a vote of referral to full school committee? This doesn't mean it'll appear on our next docket, but it'll allow us to put it on whenever we're ready. So I would like to move that we refer to the full school committee adopting town bylaw 839, menstrual hygiene products access, including the amendments approved by town meeting on June 6, 2023, relative to reproductive and gender healthcare. Is
I'll
there a,
second that.
thank you, Stephen. Andy, your vote?
Yes.
Stephen?
Yes.
And I also vote yes. All right, so now we will move on to a policy that Mariah kindly drafted for us, which is a new policy for parent guardian access to school buildings. So Betsy, if you could put that on the screen for us.
Yep, will do. Can everyone see it?
David, I don't think I called it parents and guardians. I think I called it just building access, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so do you want to take us through it, Mariah?
Sure. So this policy is meant to be very open-ended at this point. I structured it as really a discussion document rather than trying to be prescriptive in any way. And the idea was that currently we have very little access by caregivers or the community really in most of our buildings for most of the time. And it's a challenge both in terms of building school community often. People feel disconnected from the buildings and the life of what happens inside for the most part. It's also a practical challenge, just to give one what might seem mundane, but I don't think it is. Example is being able to go to Lost and Found even. You can't even get to Lost and Found these days to see if your kid's stuff is in there because of how the buildings have been essentially completely locked down. And so really it's looking at how do we rebalance from perhaps not what might have felt to some people as a free-for-all before COVID, but how we start to perhaps swing the pendulum back a little bit towards more access in buildings in a controlled way and in a way that that builds community while also ensuring that staff have the support that they need to do the job that they need to do and to help our students. Yeah,
So-
actually, I would add one little thing, David, which is just that another component of this is allowing the broader community access to the buildings too, and thinking about ways that we can serve as these buildings, which are a community investment, can serve as resources. And that's something that we had talked about, I think at our summer workshop as well. You know, just creative thinking around, are there opportunities to partner with the senior center for something, or to think about other ways in which the buildings can really be a resource for the community. That's all I've got to say.
Andy?
I guess the question for me here, so this, as it's currently written, this looks more like a resolution than a policy. And I think, Mariah, you're saying that may have been what you intended. It's just that this is controversial enough and is going to be, I mean, there are going to be plenty of staff who are sort of against this approach, right? And so I'm not sure that we can just have a policy that asks, that puts the burden on building leaders and staff to develop, you know, the actual meat of the policy. I think if we really want to do this, then the school committee has to take the responsibility on itself and probably, you know, get a little bit more into the details than is done here.
It was my plan to not be prescriptive at this point. And I also think I talked about it would be a plan for school access. I'm not sure it's appropriate for school committee to talk about the actual plans. I mean, it's sort of an operational function, right? That really is a school leader thing. And I don't want to be prescriptive to them and tell them how they need to do it. But we want we have our larger objectives. Now, you're right that maybe there could be more here yet, but I just didn't want to get ahead of the process. I wanted to sort of have the big picture objectives there and then see what people thought.
From a big picture perspective, I'm very pleased with this. I certainly would like to see our school buildings return to more of a community atmosphere within the obvious limitations that you've already laid out. Having caregivers be able to enter the building and drop off their students and have some interactions, and then also, of course, community access to our schools when they are not in use by students, so that the entire community can benefit from these significant investments. So I strongly agree with these goals. To the extent that we go into additional detail, I think that will depend on whether the principals themselves would prefer to have more structure around what's being expected of them, or if they like to have that wide latitude and discretion to define for themselves. But I read this includes allowing for access by caregivers before, during, and after drop off and pickup as a fairly strong mandate that whatever does get crafted by each building leader, it has to allow for access to caregivers during those times of day. And I think that's where we've seen some of the major complaints on the part of parents and caregivers, that they feel excluded from the school because they're usually not even allowed into the building. This would certainly be a 180 from that practice. Stephen?
First, I want to say I totally support this policy as it's evolving so far. Two comments on it. One is, I wonder if we can add a bullet that elaborates that the building access policy should be expanded to extended day as well. That it's PSB's expectation that extended day programs should be supported by schools where possible, because I think we've heard a number of stories of those programs having to beg for space and being treated in some cases like an afterthought. Not in all cases, but in some cases. And secondly, I think I agree that I think we'll need a lot of feedback from from schools themselves on how to make this a policy that can be eased back into the new norm. This was the old norm. I think it should become the new norm again, but I think we need to be mindful of change management as well.
Mariah, go ahead.
Thanks. I just wanted to say that I don't think we need to go back to the old norm, because it was my understanding that one of the big challenges that was being reacted to was caregivers who were treating pickup and drop off like impromptu parent teacher conference times. And it made it really difficult to start the day or to move on to whatever the teachers needed to do after the school day. And I think that we need to be clear that educators have like that there's boundaries in place. So we're not going back to just the old way of doing things either, but it's a sort of, again, like I said, a sort of a realigning of the swinging back of the pendulum a little bit, so that we're putting guardrails in place for these educators to be able to do their jobs while also allowing for some of that community building as we've discussed.
Anyone else? All right, so where does the policy subcommittee feel that we should go from here? Invite the principals to the next time that we docket this agenda item for their feedback, or just send it out to the principals for written feedback? Who else would we like to see opine on this? Stephen mentioned extended day program directors.
Yeah, I think the first port of call is the principals, whether through written feedback or through an invitation. Probably written feedback. They're busy enough. Or we could ask Dr. Guillory whether he thinks they'd prefer to give it, in what form they prefer to give their feedback.
Mariah?
That's an old hand, sorry.
All right, anyone else have thoughts on this? I also would like to see this come up for discussion at full school committee at some point, so that we have an understanding what the other school committee members feel on this who are not present today. So I would like to move that we refer this policy for consideration by the full committee. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Stephen. Stephen, your vote?
Yes.
Andy?
No, I think it's premature until we get some feedback from the principals to sort of to put into the mix.
All right, I also vote yes. I do respect your vote, Andy, and the
I
purpose.
vote no, David.
Oh, okay. Val votes no. All right. So 2-2, so it doesn't pass. All right.
I agree. I agree that it should go to school committee at some point. I just think we need to wait for feedback and integrate that. At least in a markup. We don't have to change it, but I think we should at least include the comments that we get.
That's fine. My main reason for bringing it to school committee was not so much to take this draft as is, but similar to our discussion the other day at school committee around school placement and retention. I was just hoping to be able to hear from the school committee members who are not present today, their macro level thoughts on this, because that would help inform on the next draft. It was not intended to have a vote on this precise language, but because of open meeting law, I can't ask them now. So that's why, but we do have Helen here, so we can at least hear from Helen. Go ahead, Helen.
Mariah was, I think, about before me. Mariah, did you want to talk first?
No, go ahead and I'll talk after you.
Okay, I think it's premature. I think you need to, yes, I want everything as a public conversation, but I think we need to understand everything first before it goes out as a public, so that it's a more complete draft policy. I think the reason that we have a subcommittee is to be able to discuss these things in a way that makes that's easier and helps facilitate conversation. And okay, I've said my piece. You understand?
I do. Mariah?
David, I was just going to suggest that like the life of the school policy, that perhaps when you have the next draft, I can share it with extended days directly so that, or if you want me to share this one so that they can provide their comment in the way that it seems they prefer to, instead of being invited to the meeting.
All right.
And they can be invited too, but this way they have it offline as well.
Okay. All right.
One other sort of minor thing you might want to, so that you don't have just one partnership, I would put recreation, partnerships with the recreation department, the Brookline Senior Center, etc., or whatever, for example.
Don't we already do that?
Yeah.
Okay.
But I mean, this is building access policy.
All right, so let's move on to the next agenda item then, which is discussion of a new policy to standardize district communications. I think this is something that Stephen and Mariah have been working on, so perhaps one of you would like to talk about what you envision here.
I don't know anything about it, so it's not me.
All right, Stephen?
The standardized district communications.
Yes. There had been a discussion back at the summer workshop around how we would handle when the district comes out with certain communications, who would receive those communications, what would be the trigger for receipt of those communications, who would be responsible for it. And we had indicated that we would discuss this at some point, but I'm seeing.
Oh, I know what you're talking about now.
All right, go ahead, Mariah.
If I recall correctly, this was, for example, why are sometimes their messages going out about a swastika written, but other times not?
Oh.
And so, is that correct, David? Am I recalling? Like, so
Yes,
families often
that's-
feel like, why is one issue, it feels like being covered up and another one's being highlighted? Is that
That's-
correct? That
It is. That's one example of it. The other example was how we define which community receives which notification.
I see.
right. Okay. At least I know what you're talking about. I think I missed that this was something we were working on, but perhaps we could go back, Stephen, and talk
Yeah,
about it with
we haven't
Val.
done anything about it, obviously, so we'll
No.
have to discuss it.
Okay. All right, then before we go to new business, because we now have Valerie with us. Val, was there anything that you wanted to address from one of our prior agenda items from today? So inclusion, the life of the school, I imagine you have something you'd like to add?
Yes, but I'd like to go back to the recording, so I'm not just saying things that people have said, and can do it at full school committee, David. I'm fine talking about it full school committee. I'm fine advancing it here and then having additional comments at full school committee.
Well, I'm not sure that one's quite ready for advancement from the discussion we had, but was there anything in particular that you plan to discuss regarding it today? So
I just wanted, yeah, go ahead, David.
just as a brief recapitulation, we were mainly focused on the part around third-party vendors and whether they would bear the financial consequences of expanding inclusion, or whether PSB would proactively take that up.
So my understanding of that legally, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that it is our obligation, not a third party's obligation.
I said the same thing, Val. That was my
Yeah.
understanding too.
So,
I mean, I think it depends on what third party we're talking about, but if it's something that is in a school building or the school is sponsoring,
If
my
it's school,
understanding is that's the school, that is the school's obligation.
if it's school sponsored, certainly. My understanding is, well, we agree that we're going to consult Special Education Council to get definitive word on it. There is definitely case law that we reviewed at the prior meeting that makes it a bit more of a muddled picture as for truly third-party vendors who are not being sponsored by the school other than renting space, that there are some differences there. But either way, we expressed a commitment as a subcommittee toward extending inclusion to students regardless of the programs that they are in after school. The question is more around how to make it happen, who bears the financial costs, and then also, of course, a more complete understanding of the legal picture. Another addition was around being explicit about out-of-district students being part of the inclusion of the life of the school.
That was, yes, I wanted to make sure that and how did you discuss it? Because the last draft that I looked at seemed to not fully indicate like after school activities and how those students would be included, and not just included if they seek it out, but how they would know about the activities that were happening.
Okay.
So, I mean, that's communications, but I think it goes to this life of it is, I mean, communications are also part of life of the school, but I think caregivers, even knowing that these things are happening and that there's access, is really, really critical.
All right. Okay, so now let's go ahead to new business. Is there any new business? Seeing none, that concludes our meeting for this evening. So thank you very much, everyone.